Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my privilege to transition to the keynote event of our 24th Annual National Character and Leadership Symposium. Tonight's presentation is supported by the John and Lynn Muse Educational Foundation and the class of 1973. It would not be possible without their financial support. General and Mrs. Muse have generously supported this keynote lecture since 2004. Will the members of the class of 1973 and the Muse Educational Foundation please stand and be recognized? Colonel Retired Lee Ellis is founder and president of Leadership Freedom LLC and Freedom Star Media. He is a leadership consultant and keynote speaker in the areas of leadership, team building, and human behavior. For his wartime service in Vietnam, he was awarded 2 Silver Stars, the Legion of Merit, the Bronze Star with Valor Device, the Purple Heart, and the POW Medal. Colonel Ellis resumed his Air Force career, serving in command of a flying squadron and leadership development organizations before retiring. Colonel Ellis has a bachelor's degree in history and a master's degree in counseling and human development. He is a graduate of the Armed Forces Staff College and the Air War College, and has authored or co-authored 4 books on leadership and career development. Colonel Ellis and his wife Mary reside in the Atlanta, Georgia area and have 4 grown children and 6 grandchildren. Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Ellis.
Thank you. Thank you and good evening. Thank you and good evening. Well, it's great to be here, great to be back again. New faces, most everyone. 4 years ago, we were talking backstage and 2 or 3 people said, "You were here 2 years ago." And I said, "Well, I thought I was until I subtracted 13 from 17. I was here last in 2013. Well, it's great to be here. And I want to thank General Johnson. It's so good to be with you again and to see you again. Enjoyed talking with you tonight. And we met a couple of years ago in Washington, D.C. And thank you for inviting me and having me here. And distinguished visitors, we have so many there in that middle section. And I'm just honored to be in your presence and be with you tonight. Class of 73 and 74, good on you for being part of continuing the great tradition here at the United States Air Force Academy. And to General Mal Waken, more than 30 years ago, I introduced him at Squadron Officer School. I was a colonel, and he was there to speak to us. He came down on loan from the Air Force Academy to talk about ethics. In the classes he didn't get to come down for, I was to fill in, so I developed a lecture on ethics for the Blue Bedroom. Well, we're back in the Blue Bedroom tonight, but I don't think anybody's going to go to sleep. If they do, it's my fault, it's not your fault. I'm here to tell a story. Now, I know that you all have had some great stories today. Fabulous stories. We heard about them at the dinner table tonight. And I'm here to tell my story. But I want to remind all of you leaders, and even you student leaders who are leaders in the cadet wing, that stories are very important because people remember stories much better than they remember just facts and information. When there's a story of a human being tied to it, it makes all the difference in the world. I'm currently just finishing up one of the more famous Vietnam War fighter pilot books. And this particular book, I'd heard so many good things about it, but the first half of it, I was just laboring. And about the halfway point, he introduced a couple of characters and developed those characters with their stories about them. And all of a sudden, my reading just took off. I really got into the book and started to really enjoy it. So stories are important. Be sure and tell your people your stories because they'll remember them and the lessons that you share with them. The good ones and the bad ones, by the way. And I'll try to share some of those this evening. Well, my story starts when I was very young. I always wanted to fly airplanes, and I wanted to go to the Air Force Academy. But I lived on a farm down in the country in Georgia back in late 50s and early 60s. I graduated from high school in 61. And we didn't have the internet to go online and learn about the Air Force Academy. I knew about it from reading one of the national magazines, and I said, this is where I want to go, but we didn't have career counselors. So I just went to the University of Georgia and got in the Air Force ROTC program, and that was where I found my home. I wasn't a great student, okay? I got through college in 4 years, but I wasn't a great student because I didn't really know how to study, didn't care about studying. But when it came to airplanes, I was onto it. Well, I graduated, and 4 days later was in Valdosta, Georgia in flight school. 53 weeks later, I had my wings and an assignment that said F-4 Phantom, Pipeline, Southeast Asia. This was August of 1966, and the war was building up in Vietnam rapidly. Well, I got an assignment to actually George Air Force Base, California. Someone tonight at our table was from Victorville. How about that? That's next to Apple Valley. That's where Roy Rogers lived. But it's a great place to train and to fly. It's right near Edwards Air Force Base. And there I actually took this picture to have a memory of what a wonderful time we were having. Because here I'm 23 years old, just turned 23 when I got into the F-4. And we're flying at faster than 500 miles an hour, below 500 feet. And when you're a kid who's always wanted to do that sort of thing, it doesn't get any better than that. I was thrilled. We did everything they did in Top Gun, plus all the air to ground, and it was just a thrill. But it was all for a purpose because we were headed to war as quick as we got combat trained. And so, in the end of June, the last week of June, Lance Saijan and I climbed on, and some other of our buddies, climbed on a Continental chartered flight to the Philippines to go to Clark Air Base, to go to Jungle Survival School, and then from there we would go to Da Nang to begin flying combat missions. But before we got there, right after we leveled off, Lance Saijan and I, my buddy, we were golfing buddies there in Victorville and Apple Valley. We were social buddies, and right after we leveled off, 35,000 or 34,000 feet or whatever it was, we headed to the back, introduced ourselves to the flight attendants, and got dates with them. Before we landed, we had dates with them and took them to the Hill Steakhouse at the Philippines. And if you read out of the mouth of a cat, the story, you'll read about one of the ladies that he met in Bangkok the first week in November of '67, and she was one of those flight attendants. She was the best looking one, but I always came in second to Lance when it came to hustling the girls. I don't know why. Well, he was 6'1" and good looking and athletic and cool and all those sort of things, but we had a lot of fun. We roomed together sometimes along the way, Lance and I did, and in the squadron we were teammates. We got there, and of course we had to have the hero shots made to send back home, and I did that. I was single, but I sent one to my mom and dad and all my girlfriends so they'd know I was thinking about them because I'm coming back one of these days. Now, lesson number one, many of you got a handout tonight, a little 3x5, little bookmark. I normally have one right here with me, but I got so entertained tonight I forgot. But you have one, and lesson number one, this is chapter one, lesson one, is know yourself. I've been a full-time leadership coach, consultant, and trainer for more than 18 years. And when I work, those numbers are good, aren't they? When I'm working with leaders, the one thing they have to start with is to know themselves. You can't manage what you don't know. And you have to know both your strengths and your struggles because you need to manage them well. And the better you manage yourself, the better leader you can be. And I mean by being self-aware. It all starts with self-awareness. Well, I had pretty good self-awareness about my personality, a lot of it, not all of it, but I'm adventurous. I'm kind of a take-charge person. I like to be in control, so that all fit well for what I was doing. My interests, my vocational interests were certainly flying, always had been. My skills were pretty doggone good as a flyer. You know, I thought I was the best, but some other people thought they were the best, and so you know how that is. And by values, my values really match the military. I'm a military kind of person, and I love the military. So I'm in the right place. And when you know yourself, and you know those kind of things, and they fit what you're doing, your work is matching you as a person, it's a very powerful situation. You love to go to work, and even when things go badly, you know you're where you're supposed to be. And when I was shot down and captured, I didn't blame anybody. I didn't whine about anything, nor did my teammates because, well, 95% of them, because I was exactly where I was supposed to be, doing what I was supposed to be doing, and that was part of the game, part of the situation. You had to be at risk. That's the reality. The realities of the war hit very quickly. We landed there about 9 o'clock one night, went to the club, and it was down the street there in Gunfighter Village at Da Nang, had a couple of beers, and it was time to go to bed, and we turned in about 11:30 or 12, and at 12:32, the rockets started landing on the base. And they would sneak in and throw these rockets in at us about once every 5 or 6 weeks. Well, my teammate there, my bunkmate there, we had these old iron World War II bunk beds. Doug and I grabbed our hard hats, but we didn't know where this was. We didn't find out till the next day, but from then on, when we had a rocket attack, we went to the revetments. So the realities of the war came very quickly. But within 2 months, Doug and I had lost, and Lance had lost 2 of our buddies who'd already gone down in July, August, and early September of 1967. 6 weeks after I went down, Doug Condit went down. Great guy, great pilot, wonderful guy. Played small linebacker at Oregon or Oregon State back in the day. He didn't come home. I didn't come home from my last mission, my 53rd over the north. You had to fly 100 over the North Vietnam, or 1 year in country to go back home. So everyone at my base, all the fighter pilots are counting them off. We call them counters. I had 53 over North Vietnam. I was on my 53rd when I didn't get this, which is a trip back south, a trip back home. This airplane, that's the coast of North Vietnam in Route Package 1. Didn't make it back that last time. So I have, actually that was the 53rd and a half, so 53rd, that was the 54th mission. The next day, after I was shot down, and while I was captured almost immediately, they surrounded me, grabbed me. I will say this, the training we had was so good, I knew exactly what I was supposed to do. My life didn't flash in front of my eyes. I wasn't in stark terror, fear. I was doing by the numbers the training that we had, executing the training. And you talk to anybody who's been in that kind of situation in war, and they will tell you, dogfight or whatever it is, you just go to your training. So training is wonderful. It can save your life. It certainly saved mine. But I landed right in the middle of the gunners that we were bombing and that were shooting at us. So that's a difficult plan, There is no plan. The only plan is you're going to die in about 3 seconds if you don't get out of the airplane. So I jumped out and they surrounded me and captured me. And it took me 2 weeks to get to Hanoi. And there were 3 times we were bombed by American air power. And about 4 times when the local populace came after me and tried to kill me. And only because the militia guy in charge of taking me north was a good soldier, he got his soldiers out there and protected me. Amazing. I probably had some of the best protection of any of the POWs I know. I think somebody was looking after me or something, but it was amazing. While I was doing all that, my buddy Lance went down. He tried to get me to go to Bangkok with him in the last week of October, early November, and I said, no, I've just had a trip to Taiwan, pick up an airplane. We had maintenance on F-4s in Taiwan, believe it or not, and I went over to pick up an airplane. Was gone about 10 days, had a lot of R&R in the Philippines and Taiwan. It was wonderful. And I said, Lance, I'd love to go to Bangkok, but he said, well, I'm going to meet Lenora, and she gets you a date, and I'd love to go, but I got to get my counters. I don't want to get behind. So he went. He came back either the 8th or the 9th, but he flew the afternoon of the 9th. And, of course, he came back and found out that I was down. And then that night, his bombs blew up, which is probably what happened to me also. And I think we probably were the first ones. But he was crawling through the jungles. Now, Saigon Hall, you know about Lance Saigon. I'm going to tell you, he was the real thing. He was tough, he was courageous, he was military. When we were in survival school, he listened more intently than any of the rest of us. He took it seriously. He was a great guy for playing and hanging out with and having fun, but when it came time to work, he was on it. And once he and I were in a situation that was kind of an unsafe situation, and we got out of it, but it was obvious to me he had a lot of courage. And I want you to think about courage, because if you said, Lee, what's your premise for this presentation tonight? That premise is, if you want to be a person of character, you must have courage. Else your doubts and fears will take you out. You read the headlines, you listen to the news, and you see every day how doubts and fears cause people to do dumb things and then try to cover them up out of doubts and fears, and on and on and on. When you learn to face your doubts and fears and do your duty and do what you know is right and move forward, stepping into the pain of your doubts and fears, that's powerful. It's a wonderful way to live, but it's very hard. I've been working on that for a long, long time, and I have more peace in my life now than I've ever had as a leader. I mean, I have all sorts of things going on. I'm juggling this and all these things. But when I just take it one step at a time and do my best to do the wise and right thing, it's amazing. It's amazing the blessings and the peace that brings. But it's not easy. Lean into the pain of your doubts and fears. Well, Lance was the kind of guy, he could do that. And I'll say one more thing about it. I said it this afternoon. After we came home, I had the opportunity to get to know the Sijons, his mom and dad and his sister, all really well. And Sil Sijon was one heck of a guy. But as I learned about Lance and all, they had a great relationship. And I think that relationship with his father gave him an inner confidence that a lot of us, it takes doing something along the way and passing some tests along the way to gain that kind of inner confidence. His father, I think, has encouraged him and affirmed him in a way that gave him a level of confidence and a level of courage that I didn't have. And I didn't know that, really. I mean, I sensed that he was a pretty strong guy until I was in the POW camp. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Well, the Hanoi Hilton is an old French prison built in the 1890s. Hualo is the real name. It means city jail. And when we got there, this area right here, this bottom half, was entirely filled with Vietnamese prisoners, several hundred, maybe 600 or 700 probably. And they were over there working all day long. We could hear them. Now these walls, this highlighted area is the walls. They're about 15 feet high, about 5 feet thick. There's electrical wires around the top, to shock you kind of stuff. And there was embedded broken wine bottle glass, jagged glass sticking up every inch of those walls all the way around. It was a Bastille prison. No one ever escaped from that prison. And it was like a medieval place. Cold, thick walls, very cold that first winter. Well, the American POWs were put pretty much in this quadrant right up here we call Little Vegas. You have to name things. Most of us there were Air Force crew people, and Las Vegas was a good name. And then we could name the cell blocks after the old casinos. You'll see that in a minute here. Now, the enemy had goals. Their goal was obviously to break us and get information, especially right away. And military and compliance, they wanted that. But what they really wanted was to indoctrinate us and get us to agree with them that the war was wrong. They wanted us to make propaganda for them because this was a propaganda war. And it meant they could play headlines. American pilots say bombing is wrong, bombing is inhumane, the war is wrong, we should stop it. That's what they wanted because that's what was going on around the world, and especially here in the U.S. at that time. Obviously, their goal of anti-war propaganda, they never let up. They're a bureaucracy like we are, and the bureaucrats at the top wanted propaganda. So that was always going to be coming at us. Our goal was to live up to the code of conduct. Now, how many of you are cadets and don't know the code of conduct yet? Raise your hand. I want to see. All right. Good. You do know it. I learned it as a sophomore in Air Force ROTC. I was standing up against the wall, and this 6'4" wrestler who was also an upperclassman in Cadet Corps, he was screaming down at me, "Give me Article 3!" And I had to spout it back to him, not knowing that within 3 or 4 years I would be living the code of conduct. And of course, to be loyal to our country, our fellow POWs, if you're the leader, take charge. If you're not, you follow. And basically to minimize the loss to the U.S. So between the enemy goals and our goals, we're still in the battle. It's a daily battle. In time, we developed the all-time best mission, vision, and values statement because we had mission, vision, and values all in 3 words: return with honor. We wanted desperately to go home, but with honor. And that was going to be the battle, the daily battle. Well, I went into a 6.5 by 7 foot cell. 6.5 feet is 6 inches wider than that, and 7 feet is a foot longer than that. And about the size of a small bathroom. And it was our bathroom, and it wasn't just me. There were 3 other guys. So for the next 9 months, there are 4 of us in that cell. And our bathroom is a 3-gallon bucket, and thank goodness it had a lid. And we emptied it every day. It was cold that winter, very cold. We were being threatened with torture, threatened we were going to be tried as war criminals, and it was scary. But somehow, we just had to get a grip. And somehow, fortunately, having 3 other guys in the cell, encourage each other, lift each other up, that someday we're going to get out of here. Someday we're going to go home. I decided that I could make it 6 months. That was my original goal. I can make it 6 months. I can make it till the summer of 1968. So from November 67 to the summer of 68, that was my goal. Now, the Summer Olympics of 1968 were in Mexico City. So my goal was to be at the 68 Olympics in Mexico City. And when I didn't make it, well, first of all, I believed that was possible because I thought that President Johnson could not get reelected unless he ended the war. But he tricked me. Twice he tricked me. He stopped the bombing in that spring, and then he announced he wasn't going to run for president. So we sat. And that's the reality of it, and we knew it was our duty. We had to do our duty. But staying positive was so important. As a leader, part of your job is to suck it up, face the difficult things. It's the Stockdale paradox that Jim Collins kind of put together from Admiral Stockdale's remarks. You must never give up hope of a good outcome, but you must brutally face the current realities. We had to brutally face those current realities, but we also had to stay positive. And so that was not easy. It's never easy when things are going bad for leaders. You can do it. Guard your character. Lesson number 3 tonight is guard your character. Lesson number 2. And it comes up quickly because I had the senior ranking officer in that little cell started collaborating with the enemy. One of the very, very few, and with no real bad treatment. He starts collaborating. He starts rationalizing. He starts saying why the war's wrong and why we shouldn't be there. And it probably didn't help that he'd just gotten his bachelor's degree. He went bootstrap and went back to school and got his degree at a very liberal political science institution. And so when he got to Hanoi, and by the way, we had a speaker in every cell, and morning, noon, and night we had propaganda. And they had a lot of American speakers on that little speaker propaganda box every day. One day when he was out of the cell in an interrogation or a quiz, Captain Fisher, who was the second ranking guy in the class, in the cell, said, "Hey guys, I think he's violating the code of conduct. He's been unfaithful to our country. I think I should relieve him of command and take charge of this cell. Will you support me if I become the SRO?" We said, absolutely, we would love that. We would feel better about it. And so when the senior officer came back, the captain, who was actually my front seater in the F-4, we had pilots back then in both front and the back seat, relieved the senior ranking officer of command. A very bold stroke. We mutinied against our leader, but we knew we were doing the right thing. And he had the character to step up and own it and take that risk. He could have been court-martialed if he'd been wrong. This guy had been the state champion of New York wrestler in his weight division, 165 or 168 pounds or so. So he was physically tough. He was mentally tough, and he had incredible character. He would not compromise. And so not only in that cell, but we moved to Sante 9 months later and were there 2 years, but altogether he was my senior ranking officer for almost 3 years in the most difficult situation. When we were going through torture and trying to brainwash us with their propaganda every day, and to have a person of great character leading you. And let me tell you, when you're in that kind of tough situation and the leaders go first into the torture chambers, you don't want to lead anybody. And when you're a young troop who's struggling with your own courage and facing interrogators, I'm doing everything I can to go eyeball to eyeball with them. But to have a leader like that that's setting the example, it makes all the difference in the world. It means everything to have a leader of character that you want to be like. And I decided right away, I didn't want to be like this guy. I knew that already. I'd already discounted him as a leader. But Captain Fisher was someone I wanted to be like. I wanted to grow. I knew he was stronger, mentally tougher, and he had more courage than I did. And I wanted to be like him. So I started more. I never did anything. I never collaborated. I never gave him anything for free, that's for sure. So I was always resisting hard, but I wanted to be tougher. I wanted to have another layer of courage. And I just kept pushing myself. I gained more confidence in my ability to push myself into that and to take what came with it. And learning to take what came with it, the consequences of those decisions, was a big part of growing up too. So I felt like I was maturing as I went through that. Now, confronting your doubts and fears, I've already said, is the way you deal with your courage issue. You have to confront your doubts and fears. In that cell, it wasn't long till we had interrogations where we were hauled in and they wanted us to fill out a 3-page biography, and then they wanted us to make tapes for record tapes for the intercom, these speakers in the rooms. And of course, we said no. First thing was a biography. I said no. I filled out my name, rank, service number, date of birth, and that's it. So then I went out, they hauled me out, and I got the good cop and the bad cop, believe it or not. They were somewhat sophisticated in that part. So the good cop says, but I don't want to hurt you. The other guy wants to hurt you. He will torture you very badly. Sometimes there were things up there, you were in terror, but you just wanted to laugh in their face, which would have not been very wise. It would have been relieving, but not very wise. So we all went through torture, except for the one guy who had been relieved of command. One of the things we learned is that, everything kind of falls on a bell curve. And of the people who were there, I would say if you took 100 people in the culture, because we're military, because we've been trained, because we're warriors, that we would certainly be on the courageous side of that bell curve. But even within that side of the bell curve, there's another bell curve of courage. And some people are just tougher than others. And so what we learned in the camps was that one guy might be able to go 3 days, another 2, another 1, and they're all doing their best. Some people can take pain and torture and being alone and beaten and kicked and tied up and all the things that went with it. Some people are just better at that. And the amazing thing was our leaders, like Stockdale, Reisner, and Denton, they understood that. And they went the most often into the torture, were beaten the most, and they understood this very well. They were so humble because they were humble people. They were very strong personalities, but they were humbled even more in that situation. And so they had this really side of being able to understand. Sometimes they were able to withstand more, and other times they couldn't. They were on a rebound, and they were emotionally not strong enough to go very long. My goal was that we're going to fight them for everything that they come after. We're going to fight them. We ain't giving them nothing. And that was the culture. And if you did your best at that, then you were heroic in our culture, and there was no ups and downs. We were all on the level playing field. So confronting our doubts and fears was a daily thing. I mentioned General Reisner. You got the 9 foot tall statue out here of him. He was an ace in the Korean War. In April of 1965, he was on the cover of Time magazine. He was a hero. He was famous. In September 1965, he was shot down and captured. He became the senior ranking officer in the Hanoi Hilton. And for several years, he was operationally the senior ranking officer and ran the show. And because of that, when he took over in the fall of 1965, he was hammered and he was tortured. The pretzel, he'd been in the pretzel. By the time I got there, he'd already been there 2 years as a senior ranking officer. He'd been in the pretzel several times, and this was horrific and horrible. He'd already been in that several times. He'd been beaten several times. And when I first met him there, he'd just come out of 10 months of total darkness, during which time he told me he had anxiety attacks to the point that he couldn't scream. They'd come in and beat him up. He would just get his blanket and put it around him and then take a big bite of it and just scream into the blanket because he was having such anxiety attacks. And sometimes he would just start running in place because that was the only thing he could in that dark. There's rats running around, big rats. They had big rats over there. Rats are running around, bugs are running around, everything, and you're in the dark and you're alone, and you've been alone a long time. You can imagine the anxiety. Well, Reisner, I got contact with him through visual contact. There was a covering. We had one little window in our cell, and it just had bars, no glass, but it was covered with a rattan mat. And I was a lead communication officer because I had good eyesight and good ears, and I'm really good at taking risks and knowing when to push and when to back off. And my mother would say I was sneaky, okay? So I was the lead communication officer in our group. And so I got contact with him, and I could visually see him and he could see me. And we would spell out words like this because we couldn't tap and we couldn't talk out loud. There were guards around. So we would just spell out, this is your whiteboard and this is your marker. And we could see the writing, the hand moving and tracing out the letters. And we started to communicate. He said, I'm in charge and here's what I want you to do. Be a good American. Live by the code of conduct. Take torture up to the point of permanent physical or mental damage, and then no more. Go ahead and give in. Give as little as possible. Bounce back because they're going to come after you again. You got to bounce back. Get yourself emotionally going as quick as you can. You get yourself bouncing back emotionally going because when I was tortured to fill out that biography, I was in leg irons and around my knees, and my hands were tied, and I finally said, okay, I'll fill it out. Of course, I filled it out. The only true word in that was my father's first and last name. There were no other words because I hoped to get a letter. There was no other truth in that whole 3-page biography. But I laid on that floor and cried like a baby because I felt like I was the lowest human being that had ever worn the uniform, that I'd let my country down, that I wasn't tough enough to beat them. Well, when I get back to the room, I join up with Fisher and Warner, my other 2 cellmates, and they'd been through the same thing. I got back before Warner, after Warner, and before Fisher. He went longer, but not a whole lot. We'd all done the same thing, and we kind of consoled each other. And then when we finally got communications in the camp, we found out everybody in the camp had been there, done that. And that was kind of encouraging. No, we did our best. We didn't win, but we didn't give them anything. Stay united through communications. That was Stockdale said, our blood and sinew. Communications, you got to have that, because otherwise you're isolated, you don't know what's going on. And then pray every day, go home proud. Very simple guidance, but that clarified the culture. All great organizations have clear culture. The Air Force, the Air Force Academy, Southwest Airlines, NASCAR has had a great culture. They had to patrol it. IBM had a great culture, they lost it. And then the fellow who taught elephants to dance came back in and helped them rebuild their culture. Built, developed, communicated to the lowest level of your organization. Your culture is your guardrails that keeps people, you don't have to be there telling them what to do. They know what the culture is, they know what's expected. They can live within those boundaries and make decisions and operate. Culture is so critical. Make sure you tell your people about it. Well, Reisner and I communicated there, and then after the war we were good friends, and we spoke together at Air University a few times, and just a great leader. He had the natural talents, a naturally talented leader, but also a learned and studied leader, and an experienced leader. And everyone loved Reisner. And he went through hell. He was in solitary confinement for more than 4 years. That's a lot of suffering he did. Denton was in solitary confinement more than 4 years. They were in Stockdale more than 4 years, and they took the worst of the treatment. They were all there 7.5 years. I'm only there 5.5. I'm a new guy, okay? Interestingly enough, Stockdale died early at 82. Reisner died a couple of months short of 89, and Denton died about 90. So their suffering did not cut their life short. Their suffering made them even better than they were. Suffering is hard in the moment, but in the end, we learn best in suffering. And they certainly set a great example of that for us. I'm glad you have the trophy, the statue out there, and when you walk by it, I want you to remember the suffering of Reisner and the example he set for us, and let him be an example for you. Now, we had to communicate, and that was verboten. We weren't allowed to communicate. If you got caught, beatings, torture, isolations, all that kind of stuff could happen in a hurry. That's why I was so sneaky. I didn't want to get caught. The incentive was very high. One guy brought this code in from survival school. He stayed after class and asked the instructor, said, "Hey, Sarge, you were in World War II, and you taught us about this. You were in the POW camp, and you said that they tapped on the pipes from one building to the other and communicated that way. You can't tap a dot and a dash. It's just a tap. How did they do that?" And the sergeant said, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, it wasn't Morse code. It was a tap code, a 5x5 matrix." Well, one day a guy took a great risk and came up under our cell window and said, "You guys know the code in there." I jumped up, looked down, and I said, "No." He said, "It's a 5x5 matrix. A is 1, 1, B is 1, 2. And about that time, the guard came over and slugged him and dragged him off, pushed him away. So I didn't know the missing letter. Because see, 5x5 is 25 letters. There's 26 in the alphabet. It took us a couple of months to find out that the missing letter, I said, well, it's obviously Z, because that's at the end, and we don't use that letter a lot in English. It's not German, you know. We have some German words, but it was K. You use C for K. Now, the way it worked, you go down and then across. So if you want to say hi, you go down 2 and over 3. There's your H, and your I is down 2 and over 4. That's pretty slow. But with a lot of time to practice, time. POWs have a lot of time on their hands. So I would sit and tap, 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 practice. So then we got really fast. That was high, really quick. And I hate to inform all you young people, you did not invent shortcuts. We had shortcuts 30 years before cell phones. We had shortcuts for everything. What was WT? When was WN? On and on and on. So this kept us busy. The bottom line here is you must over-communicate your message. If you're a leader and you communicate something one time and you think everybody gets it wrong, you have to over-communicate that message several times because they get twisted. In the POW camps, messages are always getting twisted and turned around. So we had to come at it from several different ways, and you do too. Face-to-face, video, text, email, telephone. Face-to-face is always the best, you know. If anything emotional, don't send an email and don't send a text if it's got emotional stuff in it. That's a big mistake. Okay? You know that. Okay. But you communicate because it's your lifeline. It was for us. That's how we reached out. It's also how you clarify policies, changes, what the enemy's doing, what we're doing, and it's how you encourage and support people. People are not machines. They're not computers. They need encouragement. We have hearts. We have spirits. All motivation, every bit of motivation in the world comes from emotions. I hate to tell you, but emotions is what makes the world go round. That's why you buy a Corvette, and you buy a convertible, and you buy this house, and you buy this house. You may rationalize it, the decision, but it's pretty much emotional. That's why when they sell, you see the old Coors beer commercial, the guy's sitting around the fireplace out in the Rocky Mountains, and then one looks at the other one and said, man, it doesn't get any better than this. They're trying to make you feel if you had that, you would have everything you ever wanted. Emotions as a leader, you better learn to manage yours and learn how to read and manage your relationship with others. And we had to encourage and support each other. That was critical. Well, that code was good, but one day we moved into a camp, some guys did, in another camp, and they could see a bunch of POWs about 40 or 50 yards away, and they couldn't tap to them, and they couldn't yell out. And this guy from the class of 64, Tom McNish, he and his cellmate sat down and figured out in one afternoon this brilliant, innovative, creative hand code. And you could learn it in 5 minutes. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, and so on. So we could learn it really quick. And it was so fast. You know, as a communicator in a later camp, I used this and I would communicate with the cell that John McCain was in, and he was about 20, 30 yards away, and his guy who was his communicator would say, hi, TD, that's TD, we, WEGOT, LTRS, period. I wrote my first letter at 2 years. I got my first one at 2.5. 6-line letters back then. But you always, if you get 10 people together, you got enough talent to change the world. Your people are so talented. Don't think that you know everything. They got hidden wealth of talents that you can tap into and bring out. As a leader, you better be doing that. That's your job, to bring out that talent. Well, we had one guy who was in solitary confinement, and he wanted a roommate so bad, and he remembered a story from the Korean War. And the story was that the guy over there had a motorcycle, and a pretend motorcycle in the camp. So Jerry, one day, he's going out to the wash house and to get his food and all. He started to come out every day, and he'd come out and get on his motorcycle, and he'd make a noise. And one day we heard this noise out in the center of the campground or prison ground, and we would drill holes in the doors or push the door and get cracked, because vision and seeing out what's going on in the camp is so important, intelligence-wise. And we'd get over there, and what in the world is going on out there? And there's Venanzi on his motorcycle going out. He did that for 2 weeks, and they didn't give him a roommate. So he upped the ante on him. He got him a pet monkey. And he would come out in the morning and be talking to Barney, beautiful day out here. Good day for a ride, huh, Barney? Yeah, okay. Okay, Barney, get up here. And he'd go across the courtyard or the prison yard talking to Barney, driving his motorcycle. And that went on for about a week. So he wanted him to think he was going crazy and he needed somebody to talk to, and thinking that they might help him out. And then one night, in my cell, after the gong rang, they rang a gong every morning and every night. And when the gong rang in the morning, you had to get up. When it rang at night, you had to go to bed. You had to do that. So we hear these big old keys, jailer keys, rattling outside our door. And when you hear jailer keys rattling and it's not time to get food or water or whatever, normal routine, your stomach goes, ugh. We hear these jailer keys. They fling open my door and push this guy in, right in there. I looked and I said, "That's Benenzi." I'd never met him face to face, but I knew who he was. So he came and became our cellmate, and he was great because he was very dramatic, as you've heard, but he'd worked in a movie theater in high school and college, and he was almost a photographic memory or auditory memory for the lines in the movies, and he could tell movies, and you'd feel like you're sitting there watching a movie. So he was quite helpful. Now, eventually, our treatment got better. We went back to another camp and went back to the Hilton, as a matter of fact, and we had 335 POWs in that prison. This is Building 3. I was in that cell. McCain was over here. He eventually moved over here. Most of the senior guys were over here for a good while. But anyway, we formed the 4th Allied POW Wing, and then they split these guys up and put them over here. Most all the colonel, lieutenant colonels over here. And this became the Pentagon. Oh my gosh, were they making policies and sending out messages all day long, just wearing us out. We just shake our head. Man, those guys, they would just do anything to keep from getting bored, you know. But it was all good. It was all good. It was good. So we formed the 4th Allied POW Gang. And in our cell, we built cohesive teams. We really had cohesive teams. I was in a cell for 19 months there, and we only had twice that a guy raised his voice at another one, and they apologized before we went to bed that night. It's an amazing kind of bond that we had there. Well, we bounced back, and then the agreements were signed in January 73, and then we went out in groups, 4 big groups and a couple small groups. But I came home in the 3rd large group. We came home in order of shoot down and capture, and that's John McCain, who was shot down the 27th of October, captured, and I was the 7th of November. So in that 11 days, they captured about 5 guys between him and me. So we came out on the same airplane, came back to the States together after the war. You have to be resilient, and to do that, you have to bounce back. And there's a lot more to resilience, but having hope and having teammates are very important parts of that. We celebrated, there's Ken Fisher, my buddy, and me and John McCain back there, headed home, spent 2 days in the Philippines, and then flew back, refueled in Hickam Air Force Base, Hawaii, and I went to the nearest regional hospital in the Air Force, which was Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama. Came home. We believe we returned with honor, a little dented and scratched, mourned, but returned with honor. My parents were the real heroes. You know, they didn't know for sure, even though I made a radio call after I got on the ground, and they knew that, but they didn't know for sure I was dead or alive for more than a year and a half. And then even that, I knew what was happening to me every day. They didn't. So it was very hard on them, but they were troopers, and they made it through very well. Back to Commerce, Georgia, my hometown in Georgia, a little ugly little town, but beautiful people. They had a parade for me. The Air Force said, "What do you want to do?" And I said, "Well, if I stay in the Air Force right now, I want to fly." And they said, "Okay, we're starting a program at Randolph Air Force Base in June." I said, "I'll be there in early July." And I rolled in there and got in on the early part of that, requalled and flew T-38s for a long time, had a great flying career, a great Air Force career. I loved it. Reflection. Preparation was crucial. Leadership always makes a difference. If you're a leader, your job is to make a difference and make things better. You need to have a vision that's better than where you are today. Communication kept us aligned. You have to communicate with people and communicate and communicate and communicate. Culture is crucial to your success. You can't be successful very long without a strong culture. You have to be resilient. Everybody's going to take hits. We all in life are going to take hits. Different kinds. We're all going to have to bounce back. We need each other for that, by the way. And courage enabled leadership that was constant. Leading with honor was so important. Courage helps you keep your character commitments. Resilience gave us, we believed. We had faith in ourselves and each other, faith in our families, faith in our country. Faith in God was very important. And faith that we could and would someday return with honor. So to summarize, 3 lessons, important ones for tonight, I think, for you young people especially. Know yourself, your strengths, your struggles, your values. Guard your character. Clarify your values, have a support team, and learn to never fight alone. Confront your doubts and fears. Confront your doubts and fears. Lean into the pain of your doubts and fears to do what you know is right. We're not having questions tonight because we're going to go to reception, and if I see you there, I'll be happy to answer one. We'll have a book sale tomorrow, and some of your questions will be answered there. I always like to close with a quote from The Lord of the Rings. There is no freedom. What's funny about that? There is no freedom without sacrifice. Think about it. There's no victory without loss. And there's no glory without suffering. You can't be an Olympic athlete without paying the price. You can't be a great leader without paying the price. And I want to add one more. There's no honor without courage. You cannot be the honorable person you want to be without courage and growing in courage to be that person. I'll be in the Cadet Lounge tomorrow at 2:30 if you want to stop by, and I'll see you in a few minutes. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Honored. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all the time we have today, but as Colonel Ellis said, if you have any questions or would like to meet Colonel Ellis, there will be a book signing in the Cadet Bookstore at 2:30 tomorrow. Colonel Ellis, on behalf of our 2017 NCLS participants, the Cadet Wing, and the faculty and staff of the Air Force Academy, thank you so much for your message and for your continued support for our National Character and Leadership Symposium.